Alright, so we are back once again, and today we're going to be going over a replay of, I think, a couple of important mistakes that, well, I myself made. I want to say a long time ago, but really, sometimes they still pop up. So we're going to be mostly going over two really important things that I've pointed out from, or figured out from this game. We are playing the Vladistok, we are grinding to the Kremlin. Ironically enough, this is actually one of my favorite ships to play once you actually figure out how to play it. Generally, you have ships like the Minotaur or things like the Smolensk or ships like that, that even after you figure out how to play them, they tend to not really gel all that well with a certain playstyle. These battleships, though, incredibly tanky, incredibly good fun to play, especially bow in, and generally just really good ships, as you're about to see. Now, this game was played, I think, really late at night, because usually you wouldn't see me play random battles when ranked is active, because, well, rank's a lot more fun in my opinion, even with submarines nowadays. But as I said, this is played late at night, so ranked wasn't available, so I thought, you know, why not just hop onto my tier 8, get a little bit of grinding done, and have a little bit of fun. So with that being said, generally on this map, you don't want to push too hard, you don't want to push straight into this gap here, because, well, if the enemy team decides to push to their left, you're going to get set on fire and probably spam to death extremely quickly. So, with that in mind, we're going 3/4 speed, something I advise pretty much all newer players to do. If you find yourself getting caught out very often at the start of the game, if you find yourself over pushing, for the first 5 minutes of the game, limit your speed to half speed at all times. After 5 minutes is done, then you can kind of maneuver a bit more, maybe go full speed, reverse, stuff like that. But for the first 5 minutes, try and limit it to half speed, 3/4 speed at most, and it'll really limit a lot of the over pushing problems you're having. So, with that being said, let me get into probably the most common mistake I think a lot of new players make, especially if they're coming from newer games. If you're coming from newer games, or different games, shall we say, the community in World of Warships is, shall we say, very different. This is a beautiful shot, by the way. The community is very different, which means that they don't respond the same way to chat messages. The chat in and of itself is nowhere near as antagonistic or aggressive or confrontational, and so when you have people typing in chat, it's a very, I wouldn't say uncommon experience, but it's not really the most productive thing to do. And so what I'd advise you to do is just not type in chat. Generally the people that type in chat tend to be of the newer kind and tend to be of not the highest skill level, shall we say. And it's kind of a surefire way to detect when someone isn't of the highest skill level. And, you know, staying true to how I view myself in the game, I would do this too. I would message or start talking absolute shit in chat, and I was a very new player at the time, and nowadays the only real time I jump into chat is if someone's getting dogpiled by the entire team, when generally no one has the right to be dogpiled in the game, or if, you know, just issuing commands, that's it, which usually can just be done by the F keys. That being said, we do get a beautiful shot on the Leander start at the game. I think my battleship aiming starting to get a lot better nowadays. I started to adapt a little bit more. I think the main problem I had was with vertical dispersion, and as you'll see in this game, I made a few adjustments and they seem to be paying off really, really well. That being said though, knowing how tanky the ship is, knowing that, well, I spotted the Mahan and the Gajamata on the other side of the map, and the risk only being of 1 DD, which is the Hatsuharu, I decided to push and be a bit more aggressive on this flank. Mostly because, well, you're going to get things like this with the turn showing flat broadside Strasbourg. Bonus tip, don't turn flat broadside at any point in the game, unless you desperately have to, as a last resort. I'm not sure the Strasbourg had to, but yeah, he decides to anyways, and he ends up getting away with it, which is becoming more and more common in the game. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'll let you decide in the comments below. That being said though, you'll see something developing, and this is the second mistake I see people make very often in the game. If you look right now on the minimap, you'll see the mass very wide on the flank. Now for a DD, being wide on the flank isn't all that much of a big deal. Mostly due to the fact that, well, they're very maneuverable, they can get into position very quickly, and they can, you know, zoom across the map relatively quickly. At least relative to other ships in the game. As we take down the Strasbourg. Beautiful stuff. But the problem being, though, is that when you get a DD on the flank, as you can see, people are starting to type in chat. Again, just completely pointless. You can tell they're frustrated by, you know, probably a mistake they made themselves, and they're trying to offset blame onto other people, which generally is a pretty pathetic thing to do. Even if, again, I do that myself sometimes. Just like, okay. So again, when you go wide on that flank, there tends to be a really bad habit of people to really tunnel vision on a certain ship, or a certain position, or a certain goal that can distract you from the overall goal of actually winning the game and capturing caps and actually impacting the game. Now you'll see the mass here again. He's still on the flank and generally not a bad position, at least this relatively early into the game. I'm being relatively more aggressive here because I feel like if I don't, we have them on the run, we can really extend ourselves. Now that being said, there is a Synop on the Nagato and a Nagato on our left hand flanks, so I'm not going to over push here because that would just be silly and a good way to get yourself killed. But we can sit in this position and, you know, we have two options. We're in a position where we can affect the left hand flank and the center of the map, but we can also affect and keep shooting at the Monarch we have right here. So I'm always thinking ahead of what's my next goal? What's my next goal? I'm never going to, you know, unless I have the maneuverability and the agility, I'm never going to put myself way out of position just to get another kill or get a lot more damage. That being said though, we have the shores and the mass, and as you're going to see later on in the game, the Gneiss now is going to push through where I am right now, and they're going to go on a death mission to kill the Monarch. Now at this point, something clicks in my head. Well, you know, it starts functioning. But on the left hand side, you can see the Synop and the Nagato. Now, being aware of the absolute strength of these Russian BBs at medium to close range, and the fact that I don't even think the Synop or the Nagato are aware that I'm in this position, and the ability for me to get a crossfire on said Synop and Nagato, at this point I'm going to start pushing. Because again, I can tank relatively well. I have full HP. I doubt they're going to do a significant amount of damage to me, and at this point the Monarch is so far out of position and the mass is still chasing him. Now if I was playing the mass at this point, I'd be gone. The Monarch is so far out of position, he can't hit the Gneiss now really and do significant amount of damage. He can't really hit me and do a significant amount of damage and actually affect the outcome of the game. So his time left in the game might be much better spent rotating back in and coming back towards either their base or their spawn, or pushing over to the right hand side of the map and actually affecting the game. But again, now I push here, luckily enough we get the flank and we get a lovely little chunk on the Nagato. Now at this point I'm aware of the Nagato's strength, and I'm also acutely aware of the weakness of the Russian BB's flat broadside, even though it doesn't always pop up so often. And so I decided to immediately turn bow in. Now, in my infinite wisdom, I thought the enemy Nagato would also, you know, angle towards me. But as luck would have it, or I don't know if it's luck or more of a unfortunate situation for the enemy Nagato, that isn't what happened, and we get a second salvo at his flat broadside. And as I mentioned earlier, the Monarch is in no position to affect this game. And as I said earlier again, the Gneiss now is pushing at the Monarch. And frankly, the Monarch is actually doing a lot more for his team than either the Mass or the Gneiss now is doing for us. A quick little tip here about firing. I fire one salvo or one gun, and then I fire another gun. You get the kill on the Synop, we do, and then I still have just one left to get the kill on the Nagato. So just be aware in situations like that where you have 2 shots, well, potentially you have 3 turrets, you have 3 opportunities to deal damage to 3 different ships at all times. So keep that in mind when you're in those very 1v2 situations or 1v3 situations. Now at this point, the enemy team's already capping our spawn, which is a situation you don't really want to be in. Our only real chance of winning right now is removing ourselves far enough away from things like the Cleveland or the Zara, getting into the enemy team's spawn, and hoping to reset them over and over and over again as we get 2 overpins on a Cleveland. And meanwhile, the Gneisner and the Mass are still wildly out of position. And I get that these type of things are things that only pop up, or these type of positioning mistakes are only things that happen once you're in the position. You know, I'm sure the Mass and the Gneis now realize if they looked at the minimap and looked at the map right at this moment, they're like, oh my god, I'm way out of position. How did I even get into this position? And a lot of people aren't aware of the pre-steps or the steps before you get into, before you commit to these really bad plays that really gimp your gameplay. That being said, I'm generally out of range of any other ship. Gneisen is 22 kilometers away, we only have about 18 kilometer range, and the Nuremberg is basically undetectable at this point. At this point I make a decision that pushing towards our spawn is completely ineffective, even if we do manage to spot enemy DDs, because the chance of me actually hitting them from this range is pretty minimal. The only real hope we have here is if the Mass and the Gneisen decide to turn out and somehow get a kill on the Monarch, come to our spawn, and the Indirect managed to reset our cap several times. That's the hope we have now, but as luck would have it, unfortunately, that doesn't tend to be the outcome. So I hope you learned something. Maybe not much, but what can you do? And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one.